April 1942, Britain's Ministry of Economic Warfare drafted a list that would shape precision bombing doctrine for years afterward. 8 targets in occupied Europe rated critical enough to justify daylight raids. The priority designation didn't go to submarine pens, transportation hubs, or oil refineries. It went to a radio factory in Eindhoven, Netherlands. Philips Works produced 1/3 of the vacuum tubes flowing into German military radios, small glass components containing filaments, grids, and cathodes that made Wehrmacht communications possible. British intelligence estimated Philips manufactured thousands monthly at 2 sprawling complexes, the massive Stripe Works and the smaller Emmersingel plant half a mile southeast. These weren't strategic industries in the traditional sense. They were electronics shops employing Dutch civilians making commercial-grade components. The Ministry of Economic Warfare ranked them equivalent to any target inside Germany. The mathematics were straightforward. German radio sets consumed vacuum tubes continuously. Combat conditions, voltage surges, and filament burnout created constant replacement demands. Interrupt tube supply for 6 months and field radios failed, command networks fragmented, artillery coordination collapsed. One factory complex became a strategic chokepoint, not through military significance, but through industrial monopoly. Air Vice Marshal Basil Embry, commanding number 2 Group RAF Bomber Command, examined the problem with cold logic. Eindhoven sat 70 miles inland, beyond fighter escort range. Night bombing with 4-engine Lancasters would work, except the Philips Works occupied downtown Eindhoven, surrounded by Dutch residential neighborhoods. Heavy bombers dropping tons of ordnance from 15,000 feet would kill hundreds, maybe thousands of civilians whose only crime was proximity to strategically valuable buildings. Embry's staff calculated a different approach, daylight precision bombing at rooftop height using medium bombers. Aircraft flying 50 feet off the ground would avoid radar detection, identify specific factory buildings visually, climb to 1,500 feet, release bombs in shallow dives, then egress at wave-top altitude. The tactical elegance was obvious. The strategic cost calculation was brutal. No. 2 Group RAF operated 10 medium bomber squadrons from Norfolk airfields. Their inventory included Lockheed Venturas, Douglas Bostons, North American B-25 Mitchells, and de Havilland Mosquitos, 4 aircraft types with wildly different performance characteristics. Venturas managed 260 miles per hour maximum. Mosquitos exceeded 400 miles per hour. Coordinating mixed formations over enemy territory at treetop height represented a training nightmare. Embry committed all operational squadrons anyway. November 9, 1942, approval came through. Operation Oyster would deploy 94 aircraft, the largest single mission commitment No. 2 Group had ever attempted. Training began immediately. Wing Commander James Pelly-Fry, commanding 88 Squadrons Bostons, would lead the first wave. Crews practiced formation flying at 100 feet, bombing from 1,500-foot shallow dives, navigating by visual reference while maintaining radio silence. The Ventura squadrons discovered problems immediately. These aircraft, derived from commercial Lockheed Lodestars, carried 2,000-pound bomb loads adequately, but handled poorly at low altitude. Propeller backwash from paddled blades made neighboring Venturas skid unpredictably. At 100 feet, recovery time didn't exist. Skid wrong and you hit ground. After 2 practice runs, commanders pushed the Venturas to the final attack wave where they'd bomb through smoke rather than lead the formation. December 6, 1942, Sunday morning, targeting day deliberately chosen when Dutch workers wouldn't be operating factory machinery. The attacking force comprised 48 Venturas, 21 4-6 4RAAF, 487 RNZAF squadrons, 36 Bostons, 88 107 226 squadrons, 10 Mosquitos, 105 139 squadrons. B-25 Mitchell squadrons stayed grounded, their crews too inexperienced for this kind of precision work. The strike plan operated on timing mathematics. All aircraft over target, bombs away, egress completed inside 10 minutes. Longer exposure meant German flak concentrations would slaughter the formation. Boston's attacked first targeting Emma Single works. Mosquitos followed seconds later with Pathfinder marking. Venturas arrived last hitting Stripe facilities through smoke from earlier bombs. 11:15 a.m. Pelly-Fry led the first Bostons airborne from Norfolk. The formation flew north over the North Sea, turned east, crossed the Dutch coast at wave height. Navigation relied entirely on visual landmarks. Radio silence prevented German listening stations from detecting their approach. They flew so low that 31 aircraft recorded bird strikes. Several hit trees. At least one Ventura crashed into a factory building while bombing through smoke. 12:30 p.m. The formation reached Eindhoven completely undetected. German radar, calibrated for high-altitude bombers, missed aircraft hugging terrain. Local flak positions, manned on Sunday by skeleton crews, didn't spot the bombers until engines roared directly overhead. Pelly-Fry's Bostons climbed to 1,500 feet, rolled into shallow dives, released their bombs with devastating accuracy. Emma Single's smaller plant, housing specialized vacuum tube production, and the Phillips headquarters erupted in flames. Mosquitos followed targeting specific buildings identified from reconnaissance photos. The Venturas arrived last, bombing through thick black smoke obscuring street works. The entire raid lasted 9 minutes. 60 tons of bombs impacted both factory complexes with 83% accuracy, extraordinary for 1942 standards. Reconnaissance aircraft photographing afterward showed the Bakelite factory completely burned out, major radio assembly halls destroyed, glass manufacturing facilities shattered. Production stopped immediately. The cost accounting came later. 14 aircraft failed to return, 9 Venturas, 19% loss rate, 4 Bostons, 1 Mosquito. Another 53 aircraft sustained damage, 37 Venturas, 13 Bostons, 3 Mosquitos. 57% of the attacking force took hits. 62 aircrew died. The Ventura squadrons particularly suffered. Their slower speed, poorer low-altitude handling, and arrival through smoke created catastrophic exposure to ground fire. On the ground, 138 Dutch civilians died, mostly from bombs missing intended targets and hitting residential streets. Another 34 sustained injuries. The raid occurred during lunch when families gathered at home after church, precisely the timing intended to minimize Phillips workers inside factory buildings. Strategic necessity produced tactical tragedy. The strategic calculation proved coldly effective. Phillips Works ceased vacuum tube production completely. Repairs took 6 months despite German pressure for immediate restoration. Dutch workers deliberately sabotaged restoration efforts, working slowly, reporting phantom supply shortages, claiming equipment damage exceeded actual destruction. Fritz Phillips, the company chairman who'd been walking a tightrope between Nazi demands and Dutch resistance, welcomed the bombing privately, even as he publicly protested Allied terrorism. The Ministry of Economic Warfare quantified the impact. German military radio production dropped 33% immediately. Field units reported vacuum tube shortages within weeks. Wehrmacht supply officers scrambled to source replacement tubes from Telefunken in Berlin and Siemens facilities, manufacturers already operating at maximum capacity supporting their own contracts. The electronics bottleneck persisted through mid-1943, degrading German command and control networks across multiple theaters. No two group couldn't sustain losses like Operation Oyster. 16% casualty rates, with Venturas approaching 20%, weren't operationally viable. The group stood down 10 days, while damaged aircraft underwent repairs and replacement crews trained. Ventura squadrons particularly struggled. Their aircraft proved fundamentally unsuited for daylight precision raids against defended targets. By June 1943, most Ventura squadrons transitioned to Mosquitos. The Mosquito performance during Operation Oyster validated Air Ministry decisions about wooden construction and speed over armor philosophy. Of the 10 Mosquitos deployed, 9 returned. The lost aircraft abandoned its run after FW-190 interception, then crashed over the North Sea. 3 sustained damage, none serious. Mosquito's 400+ miles per hour speed, combined with wooden construction that absorbed flak without shattering, made them nearly impossible to intercept at low altitude. The raid prompted fundamental questions about precision bombing economics. Operation Oyster cost 14 aircraft, 62 trained aircrew, and 138 Dutch civilian lives to halt production at one factory complex for 6 months. Compare that to strategic bombing campaigns dropping thousands of tons over German industrial centers with marginal production impact. Precision raids targeting industrial choke points delivered disproportionate strategic returns versus mass bombing dispersed across general industry. The alternative calculation was equally stark. Ignore Phillips Works and German radio production continues uninterrupted. Wehrmacht field communications operate normally. Allied forces face coordinated German artillery, armored movements controlled by efficient command networks, submarine wolfpacks guided by shore-based radio direction. The strategic value of disrupted German communications exceeded the tactical cost of one daylight raid. March 30th, 1943. 10 Mosquitos returned to Eindhoven for follow-up strikes. By then, Phillips had partially restored production. The second raid destroyed recently repaired facilities, pushing full restoration back another 3 months. Total disruption, approximately 9 months from initial attack until Phillips Works returned to pre-raid output levels. The raid established doctrinal precedent. Daylight precision bombing at extreme low altitude could achieve what high-altitude night bombing couldn't: pinpoint destruction of specific buildings inside urban areas with acceptable, if not minimal, collateral damage. The cost in aircraft and crews remained severe, but the strategic return justified tactical losses when targeting industrial choke points. Operation Oyster represented warfare's uncomfortable mathematics: strategic necessity measured against human cost, precision targeting balanced against civilian proximity, tactical brilliance achieving results through calculated sacrifice. 94 aircraft attacked 2 factory buildings in downtown Eindhoven and crippled German military radio production for most of 1943. The crews who didn't return made that calculation real. The final accounting logged by RAF Bomber Command: Operation Oyster achieved complete mission success. Target destroyed, production halted, strategic objective accomplished. Cost: 14 aircraft, 62 aircrew, 138 Dutch civilians. Strategic return: German military communications degraded across all theaters for 9 months. The numbers told a story more complex than victory or defeat. They described the brutal efficiency of economic warfare conducted at rooftop height in broad daylight.